Boko Haram-related violence has made of Lake Chad region a protracted conflict with more than 2 million of people displaced and several violence-related events. Epicentre took the challenge 1 year ago to provide good quality data to show up the consequences of the crisis and guide our operations. Today, it's a big satisfaction to introduce Brahima Touré presentation about mortality estimation among IDPs, internal displaced people, in Sahel. Thanks a lot.
C'est au Sahel. Au cours de l'année 2014, les attaques de Boko Haram se sont intensifiées.
There were further Boko Haram attacks in the northeast of Nigeria, and they went spread to the neighboring countries in Niger, Cameroon, and Chad, and they've caused major population displacement. In April 2016, the International Organization for Migration assessed the number of displaced people as to approximately 3 million people, more than 2 million of whom were in Nigeria. And most are living in displaced communities. MSF does have assistance programs, support programs for these displaced populations. These programs are aimed at improving access to healthcare, Watson, as well as distribution of various items. Investigations on a study of retrospective mortality has been led in 2015 in Maiduguri, in the northeast of Nigeria, in and in Difa in Niger. These are the locations shown here. You have Difa, Shitiyagi Yamari, Asaga, and Yebe. The purpose of these studies in this very unsafe environment was to document for advocacy and testimonials the situation of displaced population in Sahel, and to try and better organize our programs. The objectives were to assess the specific and crude mortality rates, to identify the main cause of mortalities, to assess the malnutrition prevalence, and the measles vaccination coverage in the Difa region for children under 5. 6 cross-sectional studies have been carried out. The first one in Maiduguri in June, and then in Difa region in February 2015. The recall period was about 1 year. The population was made of local residents and displaced population. The sampling was a spaced random splicing in Difa, and except in Asaga, where there was a comprehensive sampling of population made. Maiduguri is the state capital in this northeast of Nigeria. It is the original town of Boko Haram. It is currently have 1.5 million inhabitants. The space sampling was preferred for representativeness and to better describe the population. The Maiduguri investigation was made in the neighboring area shown in white here on this map. It is the underprivileged area where most displaced populations are to be found in the communities. 4,000 GPS points were identified randomly, and eventually 1,110 GPSs points are shown with the red dots here. I've been recruited for the study. The same method was applied for the Difa, except in Asaga, where all households were interviewed. For each GPS point, there was a standardized questionnaire for more than one displaced household or residence. When there was no displaced household, they visited from door to door the villages until they found a concession with a displaced household. Same thing when there was no resident household in a concession, which was initially selected from this method. All in all, some 21,400 people were interviewed in Maiduguri and 51,000 in Difa. More than 50% in Maiduguri were displaced, while in Difa, the displaced people around surrounded 80% of the population. median age was 15 years in Maiduguri and 13 in Difa. The age pyramid showed a great base and a deficit of people between 19 and 45. This deficit, this gap was even greater in Difa. In Maiduguri, an increase in the number of newcomers was observed as from April 2014. 85% arrived between April 2014 and February 2015. From the beginning of 2014, the Nigerian army started to be very active in fighting Boko Haram. So the arrival of the military, the security reinforcement had helped the local population. In the Difa area, the arrival of displaced populations was observed as from 2013, and more than 10,000 people settled in the region. And what happened in November 2014 came after the Damasak attack in Nigeria. 235 deaths were recorded in Maiduguri, 0.30 per 1,000 people per day. In the Difa region, the number of deaths was 0.45 or 10,000 for 10,000 people per day. Death due to violence rate was extremely high, more than 28% in Maiduguri and more than 14% present in Difa, mainly due to weapons or explosions. Malnutrition prevalence were below the threshold of that of WHO in both regions, but severe acute malnutrition in Chetimari and Gamari was higher, as well as in Tumu. The overall vaccination coverage is rather low in Difa, particularly acute in Tumur, and the Yebi, where it was 24 and 31% at 5 years. For the coverage is to be also considered in light of the campaign which was held in Asaga prior to the survey. Now, the conclusions are that lower fertility rates may account for the fact that we have rather young people. There were external and internal migrations, and also adults who go back to the villages to secure their families. Even though the mortality rates were below the threshold, the number of deaths due to violence is still concerning, 28%. The overall prevalence of malnutrition was below the threshold, but they were higher in Chetimari, Gagamari, and Tumur. And quite concerning also was the low vaccination coverage in Difa, where 80% of the local population is made of displaced people. The vaccination campaign started in Yebi was interrupted after 1 day because of a new attack of Boko Haram in this location. The preliminary findings of these surveys in a more stable and rather safe environment have shown that we have some estimates of the mortality for the displaced population in this area. We have been able to describe the living population there, and they show that there is a high percentage of violent death, a high prevalence of malnutrition in Tumu and Chetimargare, a low vaccination coverage, where we have 80% of displaced population. The recommendations have been made. That is, that provided we have a proper security, the vaccination coverage should be improved. There should be a better monitoring of the nutrition status and ensure mortality and morbidity community surveillance. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Ibrahima.